Back to our discussion on 5G in the Department of Defense. Thanks for joining us. And our guests for this panel are Mike Galbraith, the Chief Digital Innovation Officer for the Department of Navy, Dwayne Florenzi, Senior Strategy Executive in the Office of Commercial and Economic Analysis in the Department of the Air Force, Bong Gumahad, C4ISR Director in the Office of the Undersecretary of Defense for Acquisition and Sustainment, Dan Massey, Program Manager for DoD's 5G Operate Through initiative, and Lance Spencer brings us an industry perspective on all this from AT&T. He is the Client Executive and Vice President for Department of Defense there. And before the break, Lance brought up two pretty key elements of DoD's 5G strategy and framework here, which are the accelerate and operate through phases. Let me turn to you on that, Dan, if you can just give us a little laydown on what's involved in each of those first two phases.
Sure, and we've talked about the accelerate phase a little bit already. That's the Tranche 1 sites that are already rolled out. We're rolling out more Tranche 2 sites, really to accelerate DoD's use of 5G through actual experiments, as we've discussed, whether it's at AR/VR at Lewis McChord or spectrum sharing at Hill Air Force Base. And we'll see more of those announced as Tranche 2 gets fully rolled out. So really excited about that accelerate piece. Lance had also touched on the critical relationship between DoD and industry in this area, and operate through is right in that space. So the term operate through comes from operating through other infrastructures, right? Currently, the DoD has to operate through existing transportation infrastructures, existing power infrastructures. If I was to start a mission by saying the first thing I need to do is go into a country and build an entirely new road infrastructure, new bridges, new rail systems, that would be crazy. Right? That's effectively not workable. And same thing for power, right? We may rely on host country power, we may bring our own power capacities, and we need to have both. The same's true in a communications infrastructure, right? We need to be able to bring our own infrastructure, just like we can bring our own capacity to provide our own power to our bases, provide the ability to span a river when we need to construct a bridge. But we also have to be smart about operating through existing infrastructure when it's there. And that's a lot of what we're trying to do in the Operate Through program, is to say, what's that right balance? And how do we allow DoD missions to operate through a 5G network effectively anywhere in the world? And that network could range from something like one of our Tranche 1 sites to operating, to leveraging with the cooperation of the industry providers, leveraging a commercial 5G network somewhere in the world. So that's sort of the big picture on the Operate Through piece.
Since we don't have Army representation on this panel, let me just offer a quick anecdote that I just came across. I just happened to come back from Fort Polk last night, where they invited a couple of us out to observe a brigade of the 82nd Airborne going through what is the first JRTC rotation there, using the Army's new integrated tactical network, which brings in, I think, an early version of sort of what Dan is talking about. As part of that integrated tactical network, they're using 4G services, commercial 4G LTE services, to help augment military tactical networks. And from what I heard, they absolutely love it. It enabled them to instantly, as soon as they landed in the drop zone, within minutes, get a complete picture of where all the blue forces were, which is just something they couldn't do before. A drawback of that is the enemy could see where they were pretty quickly, so they had to switch off of that and move to other communications infrastructure. Point is, I think it gives them options, which is the thing I like. And I think what you're talking about with Operate Through, is that about right, Dan? It's another pathway that you can use for communications.
Exactly. It's those options. It's that ability to leverage existing infrastructure when it makes sense. And as you've already kind of alluded to it, at times it makes a lot of sense. At times it also brings in risks. So we are absolutely not saying, two confusions we often try to clear about Operate Through. We are not saying that DoD will switch to solely relying on commercial 5G networks. Obviously, that's not the case. We need our own capabilities. It's equally not true that we'll never be able to make use of any of that commercial infrastructure, as you just pointed out with that example. Right. So we want to strike that right balance. And for me, the most interesting part in striking that right balance is the security and the resiliency of the system, right? Because it's clearly a different set of threats when I consider operating through a a commercial in your example 4G, or in future examples 5G networks, versus operating through a network that I've brought along as part of my mission. So getting that security right, I think, is one of the hardest challenges and one of the most interesting challenges.
Let's open that up to the whole panel on the broad topic of security. What are y'all thinking about in terms of what are the biggest security challenges with moving to 5G? Obviously, it comes with its own security features that are more helpful than previous iterations of wireless standards, but just by virtue of connecting everything, you're also creating a bigger attack surface. So how much a concern is that alone, and what are some of the other things that you're thinking through from a security perspective on 5G?
I'll start. A couple of two things. First, I'll start with just the global supply chain that 5G brings in with, there's a whole new ecosystem of devices, bandwidth, et cetera. And I know that remains a high priority for the nation in terms of, a safe for use set of hardware and environment, right? So that I won't dive deep into that, but just the nature of 5G itself, the virtualization, the software defined nature of 5G just brings a whole new set of cybersecurity risks that we've never had to deal with before. A lot of that is dependent on, the number of devices that are attached to the network, the type of the devices, the complexity of the architecture that we're in, where we are, just as Dan was talking about. You talked about the broader attack surface. As we connect those tactical networks, those 5G networks into our existing network for that seamless flow of data, security needs to be the same and seamless throughout that. If we're going to operate on an adversary's 5G network, potentially, our security needs to be such that can't be hacked and can't be detected, right? So the virtualization of 5G and the security associated with that, to me, is probably the biggest thing that we as a set of DoD components and a single team can be working on together. Not to mention with our partners, right, and our allied partners. So,
if I could add from a component standpoint, there's heavy reliance on foreign manufacturers of a lot of these components, and we recognize that within DoD. We do have a challenge with microelectronics, as an example. And a lot of those components feed a lot of the 5G systems we have, and the domination of our foreign manufacturers and companies is one concern we have, not just from a security vulnerability standpoint, but from a standpoint of supply chain choke points potentially, as we kind of saw with what happened here with the COVID pandemic. So that's one area we're looking at heavily within DoD, how to mitigate some of the concerns and issues around supply chain.
I mean, all the issues that you folks are raising, it seems to me it may be the forcing function that causes the concept of zero trust to move from a buzzword that everybody talks about in panels like these to something the department really has to implement, because that foreign adversary network with components that came from who knows where really is the perfect example of a network that you must not trust. So you've got to be able to, I mean, this goes to operate through again. I think you've got to be able to communicate, even though you don't know the provenance of the IT channels that you're working over.
Yeah, so let me jump in on that. And that's, we've already discussed, 5G is going to be transformational, and we can't let security keep us from the impact, the operational impact that it's going to have on DoD and our economy, as I said, our whole country. So we need to keep moving forward, but how do we do that in a secure, careful way? And as already has been mentioned, 5G actually, the standards have been developed to actually improve on security compared to previous generations. But at the same time, the attack surfaces and the unique architecture is going to bring up new things. I think the two biggest concerns that I have are the complexity of the network, and then the introduction of all these Internet of Things devices. Before, we've had our phones connected and maybe laptops, but now we're going to have sensors. We're going to have our critical infrastructure connected in ways that it has never been before. And the standards haven't been developed. The experience is not there yet. These are key areas, but industry is working on it. It's important for our country as well, not just for DoD. So we're going to move forward on that. But I think there's 4 kind of areas that we need to prepare ourselves, and Zero Trust is part of that. And that is, so first would be design. How do we design a network with security up front, not as an afterthought, but really put this, recognize that the complexity, understand what we're getting into, incorporate a Zero Trust type of architecture into that. And the next is trust, making sure that we have trusted vendors and operators. Again, it's not foolproof, but at least we need to make sure that this is going to be so complex. We're going to need all the expertise to help us design these networks. And so we need to build the kind of trusted relationships, trusted partners that'll help us in those areas. And I think allies are a key part of that as well, not just the companies here in the US, but also working with our allies and the kind of experience that they're gaining. Third is test. And that's where these DoD test beds is so critical, because we're not going to roll out something to and put it on a base where we're risk averse and concerned about the security until we've thoroughly tested it and really proven it in. And then my fourth point is a phased rollout. 4G LTE, it came out in 2009 and it was fully mature in 2019. So that's a full decade it took for it to reach that point. It did achieve all the things that it was set out to do, but it took a decade. I believe it's going to be similar with 5G. We're going to see these capabilities developing over this next decade, but let's not wait to the end of the decade to deploy these things. As we design them in, as we test it out, and as we develop a certain level of confidence, we need to roll it out and then have that be an iterative process.
And Jared, I guess I'll round it up and say, first of all, I was really smiling when you mentioned the Fort Polk example, because that 4G LTE network we're providing. So that's an early version, perhaps, of starting to cut our teeth together with DoD on how do we work together on some of these problems that we're just ramping and amping up the participation with. I as an Air Force colonel, retired Air Force colonel, I'll agree with the panelists that the DoD security requirements are different, and the operating requirements, especially at the edge, are different. And bringing that together into the complexity and emerging capabilities of 5G is really important to address and get right. As a US-based company that operates globally and supports many global companies, Dwayne touched on this. Many of our large multinational customers that are US-based are very concerned about their intellectual property and data and things like that also. So I think there's a lot of innovation and solutioning going on in the commercial space that can help inform and apply to DoD problems and bring some innovation beyond some of the previous ways of how to solve those problems. Trusted supply chain is important to us too. We have an extremely rigorous supply chain compliance system to ensure malicious components do not end up in our network. And when you think about the attack surface, I think it's important to think about where in the attack surface are you talking about? Much of the existing DoD network today is really a leased commercial network. And so providers like AT&T are already providing large segments of that network. And so the components that we're vetting through our trust system, and trust is a big word in this whole conversation, through our trust system are already in play in the DoD operating space. But solving the challenges, especially I think at the tactical edge and at the operational edge, where the DoD use cases much more uniquely apply, is going to be really important as we work together to solve these problems.
The tactical edge piece of this, how unique is it to DoD? Anyone have any thoughts on the lessons learned that come out of thinking about 5G at the tactical edge, how those might translate into commercial applications?
I think Lance described it pretty well, is that security and these issues do apply across the board. So whether you're simply an industrial partner, a non-defense contractor, anybody out there, you still want a secure network. But those become a little more pronounced in some of the DoD tactical use cases. And so I think it sharpens the focus on the security challenges. And I think that sharpening the focus helps feed into the standards and the design. I think Dwayne was exactly right, and I love all four of those, but design and trust, I think, are really, really critical. And to get those, to get strong security, use cases and strong security requirements in this early stage is perhaps one of the best things that can come out of this initiative overall. And I think that not only benefits DoD to solve those tactical requirements, but it also benefits the entire ecosystem for anybody using 5G. So that's what I think is really exciting. And I know that's not a very specific use case, but I think I'll try to avoid some specific use cases there.
Fair enough. That's a good place to take a break. We'll be back and pick up this conversation on the other side on our DoD 5G panel. I'm your moderator, Jared Serbu. Back in just a minute.